the short story, The Shawl, right? So we see the three characters there, Rosa, Magda, and Stella. So this short story is, we can say it is designed to emphasize cold loss and despair. So the infant in the story, that's Magda, is the only character who thrives for most of the story. But at the end, she becomes a victim to the harshness of the world around her. And her mother, Rosa, tries to keep her alive, and through the shawl, provides the only warmth in the story. And at the same time, you see Rosa's niece Stella bitterly watching this extra child adopting the attention that Stella herself needs. Stella herself is not a very old child, right? So she craves for attention. And this attention that she should be getting is what Magda gets, and she resents it. And as readers, we can sympathize with any of these three characters, but at the end, we feel loss and sorrow. That's the ending of the story, right? So the path to despair begins with the first sentence. So if you have your text with you, you can just read the first sentence, where Stella is described as cold, the coldness of hell, right? So Stella is very young. She's too young to handle the march, and the care that Rosa gives to Magda is something which hurts her, because she herself wanted to be wrapped in a shawl, hidden away, asleep. If you look at the lines in the text, right? She wanted to be wrapped in the shawl. She wanted to be hidden away. She wanted to sleep. And her resentment towards Magda grows by the minute. So Magda has the comfort of the shawl, Stella does not. Magda has Rosa's milk for a time, Stella does not. Magda has Rosa rocking her on the long walk, Stella does not. Stella's jealousy of Magda actually creates a feeling of bitterness that infects the reader from the very beginning. So we understand how she is so jealous of Magda. And alongside Stella's jealousy, Rosa's heart is also established in the opening of the story. The three generations of women, when you read the first line, walked on the first paragraph, walked on the roads together, Rosa with Magda curled up between sore breasts, right? So Rosa is willing to give to Magda to keep the baby alive, right? She's allowing the baby to suck at her breast. There's no milk. The breast is dry. The breasts are dry. But she allows the baby to suck at the breast because she wants to keep the baby alive. But that has made her sore. But she is willing to bear the soreness of the breast, right? So Rosa's soreness, and then on the other side, you have Stella's jealousy. Both of this create an atmosphere of impossibility, right? We know that they're not going to survive. From the very beginning, it's very clear that it's not going to be a situation where they're going to survive. And again, when you look at the first paragraph, you can see how Rosa says, how the writer says, Osik says, even though Rosa did not feel hunger, she felt light. And that lightness, it can be compared to a floating angel, alert and seeing everything, but in the air, not there, not touching the road, right? So what we understand is Rosa's mental disconnect from her surroundings create a gap. You can call a kind of schism between her and Stella, and the reader, as a reader, we feel the strife between them acted out by Magda. Now, the three women are there. You cannot call Magda a woman, but then among the three female characters, Magda is the only one who experiences any true joy in the story, but she is robbed of it by the end. Magda does not share Rosa's bleak complexion, but we were reading about that yesterday. She's got blue eyes blue as air, right? Eyes blue as air, and smooth feathers of hair nearly as yellow as the star sewn on Rosa's coat. So we have the Star of David that is stitched onto Rosa's coat. That was a star that was given to all the Jews for identification. There's no biblical connotation, but people say it's called the Star of David. It's a yellow star, right? And all the Jews had to wear it to make them stand out as Jews. Now that's what the Germans made them do. So, Magda had this kind of yellow hair. She's blonde headed, right? And she's unlike Rosa or Stella. Now, because Magda did not have the same dark outlook on the future, Magda is able to be satisfied by the shawl's good flavor. See, in the first paragraph, you see these words, the shawl's good flavor, the milk of linen, right? So when Rosa is not able to produce any real milk, right? But Magda is able to be satisfied by the good flavor of the shawl, the milk of linen. The shawl is also described as a magic shawl that could nourish an infant for 3 days and 3 nights, right? 3 days and 3 nights. Now, even though 3 days is actually, we don't know how long a human body can go without water. Maybe people say for 3 days, a human body can go without water. But, again, we wonder at the enormity of the situation. The diction of the sentence actually makes us feel, we wonder at Magda. How did Magda survive? So Magda's magic shawl and her breath, how Ozick describes her breath in paragraph 1 is cinnamon and almond, right? Cinnamon and almond. Cinnamon is patta, right? Almond is badam. So that's the kind of breath that Magda had. Now that creates the only warmth in the story, and that is the warmth to which Rosa clings to, right? But we also understand that Magda finds warmth at the expense of Rosa and Stella. But Rosa gives everything to her, but Stella does not, right? So Stella's resentment of Magda grows to a point where Rosa imagines that, in paragraph 2 it's written, Stella was waiting for Magda to die so that she could put her teeth into her little thighs, right? So that is what Rosa was, Rosa used to imagine. That's what Stella was waiting for. So this Stella's cannibalistic anger towards Magda inflates due to the fact that Magda is very vital. She represents vitality. She represents life, right? So although Magda had stopped crying on the road and she had grown very quiet, her eyes were very alive, like blue tigers. That's how Ozick describes her. And the shawl becomes an extension of herself. So Magda watched it like a tiger, and only Rosa could touch the shawl. Stella was not allowed to, right? And Stella was angry at the fact, resenting the life with which Magda protected the shawl from her. And we as readers, we feel so animostic towards Stella. We wonder why she's behaving like this towards this infant. And you also see, it's Stella's resentment that ultimately leads to Magda's death, because Stella steals the shawl from the baby. And this action leaves, as readers, we are shocked, we are wounded that Stella is so selfish, that she could actually harm Magda. So after Magda is thrown to the electric fence and she dies, Rosa is so heartbroken. And her grief leads her back to the shawl. You know what she does? And you can read in the third paragraph, I think Rosa filled her mouth with it and stuffed it in until she was swallowing up, right? So she was trying to put it inside, because that was, the shawl represented everything that Magda had been for her. So Rosa was trying to recapture the cinnamon and almond depth of Magda's saliva, but she could not. So she drank in Magda's shawl. These are Ozick's words. And she drank Magda's shawl until it dried. So the loss of Magda is a loss of hope for both Rosa and Stella. So Magda's death reinforces the pre-established feelings of bitterness and resentment and sorrow that Ozick had tried to establish for the readers at the beginning of the story. So we can see that the shawl is a story of survival, not only of Magda, but all the Jews who were tortured physically and mentally and massacred by the Nazis. So Magda survived to a point, 15 months. It was not like 1 or 2 days, it was 15 months she survived. So even though she dies at the end, it is a story of survival, right? It is a story of all the Jews who were tortured physically and mentally, who were killed by the Nazis, and how they survived that much, and how there have been a lot of survivors. For example, Rosa is a survivor, right? So while Magda is living, her survival is made possible by her shawl, the magical shawl, and Rosa uses the shawl as a weapon for her baby's survival. But it is ironic that the same shawl that she had used to protect her baby could not save her from her long-awaited death. So what happens? Rosa has to use it to suppress her pain. So it was the shawl, the shawl that was her survival weapon. But the same shawl causes her to die. And it is that shawl which Rosa uses to suppress her pain, right? So when we talk about these three characters, especially when when you see Osik describing these three characters, what draws our attention is the kind of meagerness with which the characters are described. Now, we were talking about Stella's knees, like how Osik describes Stella's knees were tumors on sticks. Her elbows were chicken bones, right? That's what Osik says. And when Rosa comes from Magda's shawl, that Stella was heaped under it, asleep in her thin bones. See, Stella had stolen that shawl from Magda, and she was heaped under it. She was asleep in her thin bones. Now Rosa herself feels like she's only air now. She gives us an image of trauma vanishing. It's like they are so meager, very thin. And Magda, who was 1.5 years old, or 15 months, she could not stand because the spindles of her legs could not hold up her fat belly, which was fat with her. Those are the words that Osik uses. The spindles of her legs, spindles which are thin needles of her legs, could not hold up her fat belly, which was fat with air. Now, why was the belly fat with air? There was no food. Gas it was fat with air, and the legs were like needles, and the legs could not hold up her fat belly. So even though Osik does not describe the in detail the appearance of the characters, this is enough for us to understand how wretched their state was. Then again, Osik portrays the barracks where these people were living, most of the Jews, Magda and Rosa and Stella were just representatives. The barracks were these people lived. It's so horrible. It's full of dirt and excrement. It stinks, and there was this, there's some kind of smoke, fatty smoke, and it was like it hurt their skin. So it was a very dirty place. It was not fit for a human being to live there. So the conditions that are presented are beyond our imagination, very deplorable. And we feel that the inhabitants who were living there were worse than animals. And this is how we understand how the Nazis consider the Jews. They did not even consider them as human beings, because you cannot do this to another human being. I mean, how can you do this? But that is what they did, right? And one more aspect is Osik says, we don't admire Stella much. As readers, we're always kind of antagonistic towards Stella. But Osik I think, portrays Stella as much as a victim as Rosa. Right? So we need to understand that it's easy to dislike Stella, right? Because Stella's jealousy of a baby is not becoming. So we believe that that's not the way you treat a baby. Baby, it's a baby. How can you be so jealous of a baby, right? And the way she looks at it, Rosa always feels that Stella was looking at the baby as a cannibal. Cannibal is people who eat human flesh, right? And she knew how much Magda loved the shawl. And she also knew that something terrible would happen if she took the shawl away from her. But in spite of all this, Stella is very sympathetic, right? Because, see, she is a child herself, and she is spending her early teenage years in such kind of hellish conditions. She's cold, she's scared, she's hungry, she's angry. And we also do not know, because she's a teenager, she could also have been raped. It's not mentioned, but that was a situation that was for many, many women there. And her immediate family is not there, right? And she's not emotionally connected to her aunt, right? So you can say Stella is stretched to the breaking point, just like everyone else is. And she also wants to survive like anyone else does. So that is why she takes away the shawl. Right? It is like, we need to approach Stella from that point of view. You cannot just blame her for what she did. Okay, what she did was terrible, but understanding and try to understand her point of view also. She is not a very mature young woman. She's a child herself. And she has gone through hell. And she also wants to survive. So without thinking, she must have done that. Or maybe with thinking, or she might have known what would have happened. But you cannot blame her too much. Right? So that's about Stella. So I think the story is quite clear to you now. So we'll just recap of what we have learned. So in this story, we have the themes of conflict, control, trust, innocence, struggle. And this is narrated in the third person by an unnamed narrator. And after reading the story, we might realize that Ozick had been exploring the theme of conflict. So Rosa is conflicted as she is walking towards the concentration camp. She wants to hand over Magda to a stranger. She says she goes to the village, she wants to hand over Magda to a stranger, hoping that the stranger will look after her baby. But she also knows that she cannot trust anyone on the side of their road because they could have allegiance to the Nazi regime. If anything, Rosa is looking for someone to show some decency while at the same time being very afraid of what might happen to Magda. Right? Later on in the concentration camp, Rosa is also afraid that others will see that she has Magda wrapped up in the shawl and that Magda would be taken away from her. Now, leaving her to mourn Magda's loss in an environment where she's maltreated and under constant watch by the concentration camp guards is something, which is unspeakably terrible for her. And if anything, there is, if anything, there's very little that Rosa can do as she has no control over the destiny of her life. She doesn't have control over her life. She has no control over Magda's life or control over Stella's life. So she is under the total control of the Nazi regime that is running the camp. Now, Ozick also gives us readers an insight into the struggles that many Jewish people had incurred when they were being marched to the concentration camps. They had no food, no shelter, no real knowledge that they would survive, what was going to happen to them. Though there may have been some Jewish people who mistrusted the Nazi regime enough to be certain that their death was their only fate. There could have been people like that. But things don't improve for Rosa or Magda when they're at the concentration camp due to the fact that Stella is so cold that she steals the shawl from Magda. Right? Now, as I told you earlier, some critics might suggest this to be a very selfish act. But we have to understand how desperate Stella was. Though she was not in the same position as everyone else, she is, she is one person who, she has to put herself first because she wants to survive. So that's what Rosa also does at the end of the story when Magda is electrocuted by the fence. She doesn't cry out. She has to survive. So she stuffed the shawl into her mouth. So that is what Ozick would be trying to tell us. She could be suggesting that due to each individual circumstances in the concentration camp, people had no recourse but to think of only themselves. And if they had to survive the brutal treatment, if they had to endure the kind of harsh treatment that was given out to them under the Nazi regime, they had to think about themselves, right? They couldn't think of other people. So you can always see when we blame Stella, we also need to understand that Rosa also tries to stop herself from making a sound. It's not that she's running to her baby and picking her up. No, because she has to survive, right? And one of the saddest things about the story is that Magda has no understanding of the condition she finds herself or the difficulties Rosa is trying to incur in trying to keep her alive secretly. She's a very young child, hardly 1.5 years old, and she's unable to understand the harsh realities of what is happening. Now, for her, life may not have been as difficult because she has no true understanding to what was happening. But Rosa and Stella are acutely aware of what was happening and they know what could happen to them also. So in many ways, Magda is innocent as you would expect a child of that age to be. Right? So she is definitely struggling to find food. She doesn't know what is happening or more importantly, why it is happening. She's so, she's distressed that she's not getting food. Now, but she's silent, right? So that is and Rosa is so distressed. Towards the middle of the story, you read that Rosa is so distressed by the circumstances that she temporarily loses her voice. That is the degree of shock that she feels, And when she partially regains her voice, the first words that she speaks are directed towards Magda, right? So we have to understand that despite of what is happening around her, Rosa feels very much attached and connected to Magda. And when you read the end of the story, we understand that Rosa is unable to scream. I mean, she cannot be seen to scream. I cannot say she's unable to scream. She screams, but she cannot allow herself to be seen. When Magda touches the electric fence and electrocutes herself, you know, she's dying. She dies. She falls to the ground. Rosa knows she has to scream because it's her baby. Any mother would do that, but she cannot afford to be seen, because if she does, she will end up facing the same fate as Magda, right? And so difficult for any mother to endure, right? Seeing your child die in front of you, but not knowing that you cannot do anything about it because of the circumstances you find yourself in. So that is the kind of trauma that Rosa undergoes, right? And just like Magda had the shawl to comfort herself, Rosa also does that when she knows there's nothing else she can do to save Magda. So Magda has become an innocent victim of a regime that has killed people solely based on their religious beliefs, right? You know, they have no other reason. Now, we are also aware that the same fate might possibly be there for both Rosa and Stella. Now, although they're older than Magda, but because they're older than Magda, what we can feel is they might be of some benefit to the regime. Magda was only a child, and who may not have been seen as somebody important or beneficial to the regime, right? So that is why they killed her. And Rosa is also in a very dangerous position. And we understand that she doesn't have the opportunity to grieve Magda's loss, right? So that is why she stuffs the shawl into her mouth. But then the fate that has befallen Magda is something that can befall Stella and Rosa also at any point of time. So we understand how harsh the Nazi regime is, how they would do anything to exterminate people. They had no feelings. Right? Just like taking a baby and throwing a baby to an electric fence would require so much of coldness of your heart. See, the Nazi soldiers were trained that way. They were not even, they were trained to treat human beings as animals and beasts. So that is what the story brings to light. So we understand that in spite of all the kind of measures that Rosa had taken over these 15 months, ultimately, we find it's all in vain. And you know, we understand how terrible this story ends, on how terrible a note the story ends. It's something which is beyond our understanding, beyond our comprehension, beyond something which our heart can actually sustain or even accept. Okay, so that is the story, The Shawl, for you. I hope you've understood it. If you have any questions, you can ask me now.